Hello, and welcome to Archaeothoughts Talks, the show which, on a weekly basis, now on Wednesdays through this crisis, where we talk about how our current pandemic situation impacts the archaeological world, community, and then onwards to other cultural topics. I'm your host, Bill. Today we have our guest, Tristan Boyle. He is one of the co-founders, leaders of the what would you say is your appropriate Grand Poobah name over at the Archaeological Podcast Network?
I think best co-founder and I do a lot of things, content edit. I kind of help volunteers and stuff like that. So yeah, I do a few things.
It wouldn't be one of my shows if we didn't start off the show with technical difficulties. And my current one at the moment is I can't hear you, and that is my fault. I know that.
Dun, 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 dun,
There you are. There you are. There you are.
Yes, beautiful.
Yeah. No.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Anyone who follows me on either the Archaeothoughts Talks or over on the Archaeo-RPG channel is well aware that we have to start every episode with some sort of technical difficulty, typically doing with the audio. One of these days, I'll get those fancy equipments that you can just push the buttons and make everything happen on it. But not yet. But anyway, so we are here this week in particular to talk about the effects that this current pandemic is having on heritage places, museums, archaeological sites, biologically with say primates and so forth, and also the impact that it's having potentially having on vulnerable communities. Such as indigenous communities and people of color and just and the poor in general. What is happening, what can be done, and then I think on the second half of this, which is one of the reasons I brought Tristan on board, is that this pandemic has brought the opportunity in a lot of ways to sort of question all of our institutions. To see sort of the structure of our world collapse, or at least a lot of it, collapse so easily during this time has made people question that. So we're going to sort of talk about things, in particular, museums and should they even be there and such.
Ooh, that's swinging out the gate. That's definitely top shelf stuff. I think we need to build that kind of stuff up.
That's a tease.
Yeah, it is.
That's the tease. That's like the real high end tease that you only give in the last 5 minutes of the show. So you have to wait for that.
Yeah. Because there's a lot more steps to it, and I think we have to, especially with the environment that we're currently living in, it's important to remember that there are a lot of things that are changing daily, and there's a lot of people who are already vastly affected by this. So I think it'd be really good if we can kind of split all the topics up and then have a little bit of fun at the end.
That's the end stuff. But I just wanted to give a tease for that for those who are like, but
sure,
Tristan's here. I expect there's a certain thing as expected.
Yeah, actually, most of the time it's like music. I do a lot of a lot of shows. A lot of my podcast, Modern Myth, by the way, if you want to go and listen to it, a lot of it's actually done through music. I've noticed this listening back. So my brother's a musician. Right. His band is not related at all to my show, but it's called Modern Rome, and he's done quite a lot of music, and so I've always kind of said to him, hey, do you want to do this? Do you want to do this? And I mean, he's ended up from going from like a Black Sabbath kind of like rock music to really heavy metal to then like weird 1980s vaporwave inspired kind of like commercial music. It's great. And looking back at it, there's some really great tunes there. So if you want to actually follow his music stuff, it's Modern Rome, which is on the back of, well, not connected to my show, Modern Myth. But I like that, a little bit of flair, you know. That's what I think is really interesting.
No. We got to get the flair in. We got to get all plugs in, and that's an important part with all this in. But so let's go ahead and start focusing on like what cultural institutions as institutions are doing right now during this crisis, and mostly what they're doing is they are closing to the public, whether they are in areas where they have been ordered to close, or they're, as a precaution, are closing. Depends on where you're at in the world, whether or not you've been ordered to close or not. And the institutions themselves are still trying to engage with the public through their established sort of online outreach, which has been going on for years anyway, prior to this. Many museums have pretty in-depth online outreach, either through their websites, through apps. There's some certain VR experiences that can occur. There's certain like 3D printed templates you can get from certain collections, so you at home can print your own artifact, which is another interesting topic itself about the reproduction of cultural material. But that's how they're trying to stay relevant, and also, frankly, still play their role in outreach to a public during a time of crisis, similar to what the libraries are doing, and sort of the controversy over the is the open access library, the emergency internet library that's occurring right now, that has allowed 1.4 million books from their collection, which technically are under copyright, to be borrowed because people don't have access to it. It's the National Emergency Archive from archive.org, with their 1.428377 million books collection out there. Thank you, phone. You're always helpful.
I mean, the thing is, I always find it funny how somehow these, like, I find it funny that in a time of crisis, suddenly everything's unlocked. You know, it's almost like you've bought the season pass, you've got the DLC, all the characters are able to be selected. Suddenly, all these things like IP, like, you know, intellectual property, such as like rights and access, are all foregone in the sense, oh, no, we've got a crisis on our hands. Now, I think it's really important. I don't know what it's been like in the US, but in the UK, unfortunately, a lot of people who work in museums are on quite precarious contracts, a lot of temporary and part-time contracts. And one of the biggest hits that we've had is basically people being either laid off, furloughed, their hours cut. I've heard of people being asked to take pay cuts. And I think it's it's certainly a part of it's a part of the industry that doesn't lend itself to resilience in a time of crisis. And I think we're seeing the cracks appear. I think there's been a lot of goodwill that's held the museum and heritage industry together, and that's now beginning to unravel. I don't know what is it like on your side?
Very similar, if not worse. That was sort of the when I was going to flip the coin over this. The workers are being laid off, furloughed. Some of the bigger institutions are able to keep paying people at a reduced salary, but that's going to run out. You have cases of small, say, house museums, for instance, which rely upon sort of a charitable trust and so forth like that. First off, their staff all have to be fired because there's no money for that, and the future of the existence of an institution like that is in jeopardy, just sort of instantly. Where, something like the Met, New York, Smithsonian doesn't count because they get federal money. The Met, New York, or the Louvre, or the British Museum can weather these types of storms as an institution. If you're a curator, a just on staff curator or something like that, you may not be in the same boat. You may be out at home, looking for more work during a pandemic, and that's a whole different problem all over the world right now. And unfortunately, with today being April 1st, for a lot of people in the world, it is paying their rent day. So that's not a good thing. So hashtag rent strike 2020.
Yeah, hashtag I wish it wasn't April Fool's. Actually, that's one thing I noticed. Just as an aside, I really haven't noticed any April Fool's jokes today. I think everybody's had too much of 2020. I think we all think 2020 sucks.
March was the April Fool's joke, and it sucked.
Well, the decade that we know is March.
The decade of March.
Is that real?
The decade of March, yes.
But I think circling back to the kind of things that will happen. I personally do not believe that archaeology can return, or heritage can return to where it was before this pandemic. I mean, I cannot see a pathway out. As you said yourself, there are some small house museums. There are probably some small community groups who are just not going to survive this kind of weathering, this kind of beating in terms of financial kind of income. And what we're going to lose is we're going to lose the diversity that's there. We're going to lose key skills from the industry. Let's remember, back in 2008 in the UK, I mean, so many archaeologists left archaeology as a profession, and I can tell you a large number of them did not come back. And what it meant was all this experience, all these skills, all this knowledge left the industry, and it left the industry kind of floundering. Yeah. There's the best thing the best recovery that could happen out of a pandemic is you almost behave as if it never happened. You don't want a slow increase on the other side. Instead, you want everything to kind of just return straight away as normal. But it won't happen like that. And that is going to be very much the death knell for a lot of small groups, a lot of small museums. And I don't think that's a good thing. I really don't.
No. And last week when I was talking to Sarah Head, we were talking about the same types of things that are happening in the contract archaeology world, where there's a lot of firings occurring, cutting back hours. Even in the past week since that show, I've heard of firms which are taking away health insurance, welcome to the United States, during the middle of a pandemic for these workers because they have reduced hours. Of course they have reduced hours. It's a pandemic. But to go back to sort of these cultural institutions, it highlights, and maybe even I think it goes into the world of contract archaeology. It highlights the biggest problem with heritage is that heritage does not fit well in a for-profit model. It never has. It was always precarious. It was always weak. And all it needed was a blow, a mild blow to knock it over. It was always a house of cards. Even relying on charity is a precarious thing because you're relying upon the excess wealth of someone who is producing their own wealth, which only works as they're producing wealth. As soon as they stop producing wealth, when there's the biggest stock market quarter loss since the 1987 recession, they become a lot less charitable because they have a lot less money to be charitable with.
Yeah, exactly. And this is going to be something that I feel the fallout to this is not just going to be 2020. This is going to be 2020, 2021 onwards. And I mean, the thing is, I find it difficult to talk about this as a focus when there are so many other pressing, life-threatening issues out there for people. But in the same way, people are coming together in terms of things like mutual aid, in terms of things like supporting each other. I don't think that the heritage industry is beyond that. In fact, I think far too long, a lot of institutions in the heritage industry have relied on the goodwill and the good nature of people inside it.
Right.
And it would be actually nice to see that actually reciprocated out from those institutions, and giving a framework out to people to like work with that. Does that make sense?
No, you're absolutely right. When heritage is done right, it's a complete community effort, whether that's a small community in a small town or a national community for things like national parks and some of the reverence that comes for some of these national parks in the United States, which that's caused its sort of own problem, because the federal government, at least until recently, had tried to keep some of the national parks open so that people could get out of the house and sort of walk around during this crisis, while still maintaining social distance. Unfortunately, they would do what people do when they visit national parks. They all went to the same 3 highlighted sections and bunched up into crowds. So even the national parks are having trouble, and a lot of these, it's having trouble because it is a beloved institute. There are beloved places. If it's going to be open, people want to see them, even in the middle of a crisis. And I think that's another thing to remember with some of our heritage sites, is that when people are in times of stress and need, those heritage places can be anchors to that. They ground people in their community, in their in their nation, in sort of the timeline of heritage. Like, we have been through these things before. We have survived. We will get past this type of views on this. So they're not disposable items. It's just sometimes the way they're run or have been run could be done in a stronger method.
I mean, it's funny, in the UK, there's been a very strong kind of sense of, right, you're meant to stay at home, but you should go out for exercise once a day, and you need to make sure your mental health is good. And it does feel at times very performative, At the same time that the economy is tanking, people are being laid off, or they're having the wages cut, and they're struggling because, people are panic buying and bulk buying stuff. Oh yeah, well, during this you should keep your mental health well by going outside and doing stuff, and we're not actually going to materially help you in any way. We're not going to take away the cause. We just want to ease the symptoms because we believe that the cause is good. And that's the kind of conservative mindset in the UK. And what I think we have to also be careful of in these scenarios is that a lot of the attention is placed upon the people who are quote unquote breaking quarantine. Why are all these people going to the same place? Oh, don't they know better? And stuff like this. I'm like, you have to be clear. I mean, I think the UK government has not been clear enough in its how it's telling people. The law is very, very flaky as it's written. It's like, you should not leave the house without a good reason. Well, who's going to check that?
Right.
Do we want people winding up in court and like filling courtrooms, which is not social distancing, in order to explain to the judge that they thought through their reasoning that was a good reason to leave, And the other side is like, oh, go out and, like, you're meant to be able to go out for a walk a day. You need to walk your dog, but don't get into a car to drive somewhere to walk your dog, But that's only guidance. That's not the law.
Right.
So it's really, really kind of like, there's a lot of kind of conflicting information that really kind of doesn't allow people to kind of understand how serious it is. And it also means that, like, people don't understand the enforcement. Police over here in the UK have been basically told off for being too aggressive with their enforcement. They've been told, look, you're now, instead of like enforcing the law, they're enforcing the guidance that comes with the law, even though those are two very separate things legally. So I think there's a need for a government or state to set out actual parameters and not give this kind of mealy mouth, oh, well, you can kind of do this, you can kind of do that, oh, maybe don't do that, oh, maybe stay at home, but you can go out for this reason. I think there needs to be a better kind of a better way of talking to people.
Yeah, no, this reminds me of a piece I read in The Guardian back on March 11th by Laura Spinney, where she's talking about sort of what the lessons from the 1918 pandemic could be useful. And one thing in particular that got my attention, I'll read that paragraph here because it'll be better than me trying to sum it. One lesson governments took from 1918 is that mandatory public health measures tend to be counterproductive. Containment is much more effective if people choose to comply. But for that to happen, they need to be properly informed about the threat they face and to trust the authorities to act in that collective interest. If either or both of these things is missing, containment works less than well. In 1918, most governments were caught unaware by the pandemic because they had no disease surveillance system in place and public information campaigns were revisible. Anyway, so that unfortunately sounds like the mistakes that have been made, I think, at least within the United States and the UK. And I don't know if that's occurred in other nations, where there's been the distrust of government, there's been the misinformation about what to do and what not to do. Then all of a sudden it becomes a sort of hammer stay-at-home order, which we see is flaunted sort of everywhere. If anyone saw the news when the U.S. Navy medical ship arrived in New York, and there were crowds of people there to greet it in. Obviously not following their social distancing guidelines.
I must say, despite me saying that we have to be careful not to blame people for things in this kind of environment, because it gets into this kind of personal responsibility shtick, which I have a big problem with at a very basic level.
Yeah.
But I do find it funny that there was I remember seeing this image of let's go a march against the coronavirus, and I was like, no, why don't you march in World of Warcraft or something?
I need to get back into that. I'm doing Elder Scrolls Online right now. I see we got some chat in the chat, going back to sort of the contract archaeology. We were talking about stuff earlier, and yes, Anthrodork, yeah, that's it's a horrible thing with the reducing salaries and taking away health care while still working in the field, which is a whole other problem with going back to that, is that they're still doing field work. And I can't imagine that they have devised a method to do field. If I know archaeologists, I cannot think that they have devised a method to do social distancing field work, unless they are doing big survey work where everybody is, meters and meters away from each other.
I was just wondering, actually, near where you are, are there a lot of public parks or museums or heritage places? What's it like where you are? Is everything shut down?
Everything is shut down. That started a few weeks ago. Like the county started closing the county parks. The museums were small museums that started closing earlier. I think with one of the first federal guidance things, the Smithsonian's were closed, the museums in Washington, D.C. Most of our heritage places are closed. Beaches are closed in our state. I live in Maryland, but even Maryland and Virginia, the beaches are closed because people were going to the beach. We're looking at you, Florida, too, and you're still going to the beach.
If you're by yourself, if you're practicing social distancing at the beach, that's absolutely fine.
when you're spring breaking
But
with about 2,000 of your best friends.
yeah, I think that's. I mean, yeah, that's going to spread it. That's going to spread it really badly. Yeah, no, it's. I mean, it's the same here. I don't know of any places that are open. I'd be interested to see across the United States how that actually show it. Like, are there places where museums are still open, or even heritage places still open? Because I know
I would think so. There are
mhm,
states that are not shutting down. I believe Alabama might be one. Parts of Florida do not have a stay-at-home order in place, and so there are certain states in the United States which still have not told their public to stay in during this time. I mean, there's a federal guidance, and that's more of a suggestion. In the
mhm,
United States, it's the federal government can't order everyone to stay
mhm,
home unless they declared some weird extra constitutional martial law, which itself would be a problem.
mhm,
But that's also another problem in general during these things. I mean, if you want to riff on that type of thing, just look at Hungary
mhm,
and what they've
mhm.
done recently with consolidation of central power during a time of
Yeah,
crisis. You know, if we want to go to states being vulnerable during a time of crisis, and I only know that because I have another article ready to talk about that.
nice.
I got
Right,
articles
bring
everywhere.
bring it up. Bring it up. I want it. I want that juicy article then.
All right, so this is an article I found. Darn it, up on my screen. On Homeland Security Today. It's some sort of, I guess it's a industry sort of pamphlet for probably contractors who sell their services to the federal government. And the title of this article is "The 1918 Flu Sheds Light on How COVID-19 Could Affect Critical Infrastructures." And the part that got focused on me, and I don't know if I can argue with any of these things, but I think it gives light to where we are at in the pre COVID-19 world, is they identified 16 independent and critical infrastructure sectors. Like, these are the important things to keep society running, or the current society running, and would be very vulnerable if the disease caused uh, absent severe absenteeism, up to the point where they could no longer run. And the industries were chemical, commercial facilities, communications, critical manufacturing, dams, defense industrial base, emergency services, energy, financial services, food and agriculture, government facilities, healthcare and public health, information technologies, nuclear reactors, materials and waste, transportation systems, water and wastewater systems, were all the different critical things on there. And it's also a reminder that even though it looks like we're in an automated world right now, you need people. If people aren't there to run things, you don't have your lights on, you don't have your internet, you don't get your food delivered to your door, so you don't have to expose yourself outside if someone doesn't drive up and drop it off. So I thought those were interesting takes on where we're at.
I mean, I'll be really interested to see how people deal with blackouts and stuff because, I mean, like, I remember reading in the paper yesterday that UK is meant to be prepared for blackouts, possibly, if this goes on. I think most of it comes from the thing is all these industries, they need people there all the time. You know, you need engineers to jump in and fix things. There are very complicated interlocking factors there. And I mean, I'm very worried about the nuclear one. I mean, yeah, if that goes off, then well,
Well, unfortunately,
hmm,
I think the first one that would collapse would be the healthcare one.
well, yeah,
At the rate
yeah,
that healthcare, doctors, nurses, and everybody else in that industry are getting sick themselves, trying to aid the sick. We're losing a lot of doctors right now, and nurses and so forth.
Same.
But I think this is important in how it fits into sort of the overall arc of this thing, because it's a reminder that these things are people. These things are part of a culture. These industries are what kind of are the cement that hold the sort of, neoliberal post-capitalist culture that we are in the early decades of the 21st century. This is the foundation of these things, whether we like it or not. And, if they are severely hurt, they could damage the culture. Now, we don't, and then at that point, then we don't know what happens. It's sort of like the idea of it's easier. The quote goes around to many people. It is easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism.
Yeah, I think it's misattributed to Zizek quite a lot.
Well, it's misattributed to Zizek a lot.
That's what Zizek say.
It's in, why am I forgetting his name? Capital Realism.
Oh, yeah, Mark Fisher.
Mark Fisher. It's like the first thing in his book, but I think he's taken it from somebody. He just doesn't attribute it.
Yeah. I mean, this is the thing, is that, like, ultimately, I think we're looking at a system that cannot deal with an external impact. Like, there's this system cannot function in terms of, like, there's an idea that, oh, well, look, if this person is sick, we'll just get another person. Oh, if that person's sick, we'll just get another person. You're just constantly swapping in. And then, I mean, it all crashes when you finally realize there's nothing at the end of it. You've run out of people, you've run out of resource. I mean, look at the airline industries are currently going into absolute free fall because EasyJet have grounded all their flights over here. Flybe, I mean, was already, looking bad, and it collapsed. This was the nail in the coffin.
Right. I mean, these industries fall because 1 or 2 days of no passengers, boom, that's how fragile they were. That's why the stock market fell in the U.S. All of a sudden, there's potentially 20 million, up to 20 million people out of work at the moment, and the economy just stops, grinds to a halt, because as much as business leaders and politicians screamed personal responsibility and that every person should have a rainy day fund and be able to survive 3 months of hardship, we saw that this was not practiced by most businesses in this country. And that goes from small businesses up to Fortune 500 multinational businesses. While they were making money hand over fist for the last 3 years with the great stock market, they were not saving any of that money for the potential downfall that always happens. Now, this downfall is bigger, I think, than anybody expected. But a downfall was going to happen at some point, and these industries just weren't ready. But
I think we have talked a lot about the economic impact. I think this will stretch beyond that. To be absolutely honest,
absolutely. I'm
and that's the real problem.
I'm thinking of, because I've seen a few different things, like with indigenous communities, who are already marginalized, and basically this goes out to sort of every marginalized community in the world, especially even with industrial nations, because they are the ones who were already in the worst place to begin with. If they were they in some sort of reservation system like the United States, they are in a structurally bad place. They typically are already sort of a weak economy, weak healthcare structure, weak health of the overall population because of things like that. And this goes on around the world. First Nations in Canada, I'm thinking of the Maori in New Zealand, Australia. These communities are going to be vulnerable, and what are we doing to protect them? In the United States, we're seizing reservation lands in Massachusetts from a tribe is how it's being handled over here. So, yeah, that's good.
Surprise, surprise. I'm not surprised in any way about that. Like, that's unfortunately just the way it seems that America wants to work. I think this is the thing in every crisis, in every situation where things do not work. The first people to get hit are always the most marginalized, and it works its way up. And unfortunately, what's kind of like weird about the coronavirus, especially the narrative about it, has been where people, it's almost like, well, if you're poor, it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, the coronavirus can get you, and suddenly it's a big problem. Suddenly we're shutting down everything. Suddenly we're taking all the social distancing. I think there's almost a little bit of a like, oh, it affects us as well as the poor, but it really does affect people who don't have access to healthcare, who don't have access to money. It affects them a lot more. I mean, even the elderly who are subsisting on a state pension, with the last couple of weeks of people panic buying, these are people who cannot bulk buy. They buy once a week at the shops. And yet, just because they're elderly, they are affected in a different way.
Yeah, sorry. I was going to say, in the United States,
no, I mean, it's probably the same.
Some grocery stores have started to have their first hour open exclusively be for the elderly, so that the elderly could come in with nothing else but the elderly during the first hour. The store was open, like from 7 to 8 in the morning, so they could get their shopping done, and it would also be first access to the material after the overnight restocks, as a way to sort of counter that sort of phenomenon of people, hoarding and leaving materials out there. But this is true for, baby formula. There are people who, because of their economic condition, cannot afford to stock up on baby formula. They can afford to only buy it maybe once a week when they get their check. So when it's all gone, their baby is not going to eat, and that is not good. And diapers
totally.
and everything else like that. I mean, the supply chains are not broken. The trust of people in the system is broken. I say more than anything else. I think, what we're looking at is a cultural phenomenon more than a physical one. We're looking at people who, like I said, don't trust the states, don't trust industry, don't trust, institutions. And are in that panic, are getting. I mean, I think that's why you see like the toilet paper run, and it's a nice little joke and things like that. But I think that's something tangible. I am scared. I don't know when this is going to be over. The old adage of bread, milk, and toilet paper has been beaten in. It's become a truism, beaten into people's heads for generations, at least in the United States. So that just sticks into your head like toilet paper. And you hold on to that, where toilet paper almost becomes like a teddy bear itself. It becomes a safe thing. At least that's my theory on this.
Yeah. I mean, I thought it was really interesting when one of your articles that you shared was about how New Zealand in the 1918 influenza pandemic, they basically, at that time, the Maori died at a rate 7 times of non-Maori because systemically the health system did not provision for them. And it's very likely that the health system probably cannot provision in the same way again for them. And this is not somewhere where suddenly out of nowhere, how has this all happened out of nothing? It has like these things build up, but you have to be ready to deal with them before they're a problem. People, I don't know how I've got lots of criticism. I think there are some really, really good. There's some heroic people out there who are putting their lives on the line to treat people and to look after them. But if we look at the system that we have here in terms of healthcare, and I mean it is worse than the US, but even in the UK, they are not ready. And what that's going to mean is this time round, as probably in the 1918 epidemic, people are going to suffer needlessly. There could have been provisions put in. There could have been things made so that we don't have more people dying. But they could have done this. But they've chosen not to, and that is the key thing.
And I think one last thing to touch on before we sort of maybe move on to a sort of a lighter thing to sort of end this is to remember that our cousins, the non-human primates, are also susceptible to this as well. Gorillas,
right.
Chimpanzees, orangutans are also potentially vulnerable because of their close relation to us. The thing about the COVID-19 to remember, which is why everyone's caught so flat-footed, is that like any pandemic, this is a life form which has been introduced to humans for the very first time. We have never encountered this life form before, so we don't know how it acts. Like, it's still questionable that if you have COVID and you survive and recover, are you immune? We don't know that yet. Are you still contagious afterwards? We're not quite sure yet. How often, is it going to go away during the summer? Is it going to be sort of seasonal and die off in a year or two? We don't know that yet. So there's a lot of those questions, and this can have effects. This is potentially a world-changing event right now, and I always hashtag things on my Twitter with the dystopia, the boring dystopia, and I would classify this as a boring dystopia because it's in some ways I sit at home, I make YouTube videos, I'm playing video games. We are in the middle of a dystopia. That's weird. This is not how I pictured it.
Yeah. I was promised jetpacks.
There's no
Let's be honest
jetpacks.
here.
I don't have a bow and arrow to go shoot deer in the woods to survive yet. I call up, I use an app to get groceries delivered so I don't have to go out there. Because unfortunately, as a diabetic, I fall into one of those vulnerable communities. So I'm trying to not expose myself more than I have to. But yeah, this is weird. This is not what I expected for the end of neoliberal capitalism. Because it won't. It's something. Oh no, it could still be capitalism after this. But I think we've reached. The end of neoliberal capitalism. Something else is going to come out of this. And
I don't know.
Worse.
I don't know.
I
think the problem is that capitalism is very good at organizing itself and adapting to its antagonisms. So that's why crisis capitalism is a thing. It's like why there are kind of what I would call performative wokeness, what somebody on the right would call liberal Hollywood types. There's a lot of ways in which things that were originally antithetical to capitalism are built into capitalism, where they're almost like they're selling you the Che Guevara shirt. They're selling you the charity. You if you buy Starbucks coffee, it's more expensive, but you give the money to farmers who need it, and so therefore you're commodifying the act of charity, the subversion.
Your identity is a brand. But I think we're going to.
Yes.
What I think we're going to lose, though, is the neoliberal model of extra-national movement. It's sort of the EU is the golden dream child of neoliberalism, to move beyond nation states and to have corporate above nation. I think that project is going to fall. I see nationalism reigning in because it's going to take nations to get out of this thing, and we might see a new era of nationalism, which is not a good thing.
No, I
So
must say
that's
I'm
a potential
pretty.
that's a potential bad thing out of this.
I'm not sold on the whole nationalism thing. I don't know if I like nationalism. I would say I'm probably
No,
anti-nationalist,
I don't like
or
nationalism
a
either.
nationalist.
I have a nationalist
But
president over
yeah.
here. I'm not into that.
Hmm.
They are orange
Oh
mad
man.
bad. Speaking of, like, your
Hmm.
wokeness of their orange man bad.
Yeah, I mean, phew. But I mean, this is the thing. It's like it's all codified. Like every bit of like, I mean, the kind of like resoluteness of people who, it's almost like, oh, it's difficult to describe. It's almost just like, oh no, it's not so bad. Don't worry, our numbers are fine. The U.S. Look how many cases we have versus how many people have died of this. See, we're tackling it better than anyone else. And I'm like, have you seen Italy? Oh, but Italy's different. And I'm like, no, it's not. I mean, in the UK, I like our deaths are getting higher and higher. It's
Right.
exponential at
Yeah,
the
no,
moment.
realistically, that's the only
And
number that counts. And even those
yeah,
numbers are fudged because
yeah,
early on,
yeah,
they didn't know what
exactly.
to call it. So some of
Hmm.
the early ones are missing.
Well,
The
e-
testing, it's all
even
about how
in
many people you test.
mhm.
Let's see, current
And
Dow
I mean,
Jones, they're
even in the
down
U,
920 on the New York Stock Exchange so far
mhm.
today. Sorry about your stocks.
In the yeah, I don't really care. In the UK, at the in the UK at the moment, um, there it was just revealed that the deaths by coronavirus have to be signed off by the family. So the family have to be okay with those people being included in the statistics. So even the number of people who've died is actually that's a smaller number. It's a conservative estimate
Right.
of the amount of people who have
No,
actually died.
I'm
So
yeah, I'm beginning to read
yeah,
the Great Influenza, some books about the 1918, and they had it all wrong
yeah,
then too. And it's only afterwards that they get to the up to 100 million worldwide dead, 50 to 100 million, and they have to do these ranges because people weren't giving good records. The same is going to be true here. Epidemiologists and historians of medicine
hmm
10, 20, 30, 50
mm,
years from now are going to get a better idea that, you know, I would not be surprised if currently in the United States there are 500,000 to 1 million people infected, even though it's only like 180,000 on the charts. Um, it's just
yeah.
everything started so late.
I
This is
mean,
bad.
yeah, it is, and I think it's difficult to know really what the next step will be. This is one of the situations, like everything, the pandemic will be clear in hindsight what we should have done, and it will constantly be what we should have done. And that's just unfortunate, and I just, yeah, I think it's only going to get worse. I hate being dreary and I hate being like depressed about it, but like it is only going to get worse. So yeah,
Well,
yay.
I can
Ooh.
to show off that I am myself am still vulnerable to the consumer material culture, the spectacle of the uh, of the current era. This entire topic came about because I was reading the article about the Van Gogh that was stolen last week,
Right.
and a snatch and grab. So these this material
Finally
with an
some good
artificial
news.
value attributed to it. I mean, it is, it's a significant to the world if people adore it. It has that, but the monetary these catch and grab monetary values of these things
Hmm.
is kind of
Hmm.
obscene. But it's also the
I
monetary
mean,
value that
yeah.
allows those museums to have those big buildings and such. So, but this gives a
I
nice
think.
pivot to what you really came here for.
Oh yeah, I love this stuff. Right. Well, look, I think that there's two things here. Obviously, with nobody being in any museums, it opens it up for things to be stolen. Now, obviously, I have my own opinions about why things should be in museums and what the value of those items are. But the problem is, even a theft is based on the same problematic ideation about the same problematic idea of value inherent in these objects, because the people who want to steal it either want to keep the value for themselves, which is not what I want, or they want to sell it on, which is not what I want. I really, really have to be really clear on this, that I do not believe that there is any inherent value, financial or economic or even transactional, in these items. Their value is historical. And this idea that, oh, but somebody will pay for it, or, oh, but, they're always, like, somebody always buy it, and that's what gives it its value. I think, no. Just because something is given value by some sort of system or by some sort of consensus, it doesn't mean that value is inherent. And I think the other thing is that, like, the Van Gogh painting probably wasn't stolen by the museum in the first place. I mean, in contrast to where I see the problems are with modern museums, a lot of the items that I want repatriated are...
which has bad provenience. I don't know if... Yeah, you're right. We don't know if this one has bad provenience, but there's a lot of art that has bad provenience.
Sorry, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, certainly. And I think the thing is, like, especially in Europe, you have a lot of art with bad provenance. And I think... It depends on the way you want to argue it. Yeah. It depends on the way in which you want to, like, talk about it. So, for example, like, for me, like, the fact that these museums have items that were taken during colonial rule is, for me, theft. But it's not necessarily theft for other people, because they would argue that at the time it was a legitimate transfer of goods, or worse, it was like the state operated by colonial kind of like administrators, sending the stuff back as a gift back to England. These are both situations in which legally, or at the time justifiably, these items were sent back to the museum. However, the thing is, we live in a situation now where, for some reason, the global south, despite being independent, so they tell me, is still struggling to reach the same economic prosperity as the global north. And I think it shows that there is not just a material difference inherently in these two areas, but actually there's a relationship between these two groups that solidifies those places and doesn't allow any kind of movement. The fact is that China and India have been growing in influence and economy, but that's been very much still tapered by the West, arguably, in terms of like trade agreements, in terms of that kind of neoliberal project of Europe and, the interconnection with the US and Canada. Whereas I think what I would like to see with museums and repatriation of items is that we no longer have these bases of operation within, for example, the UK, within Europe, within America, where items are basically are kept in this kind of stasis of, well, we're the best people to look after it. For whom? For what audience? For what reason? And I think maybe what we'll see, what concerns me about the COVID-19 response will be the opposite of what I want to happen. What I think we'll see is we will see museums consolidate into larger conglomerates. So instead of being like 400 museums in the UK, there's going to be 200 big museums. And all the different collections of the small museums, because they've dissolved, they're just getting absorbed into the big ones. And I think that is going to really harm the heritage industry, and it's a step away from the kind of heritage and museum things that I want to see. I want to see a global change in the structure of those museums. That I think is going to be the biggest problem. I mean, I don't know what you've seen online, but I feel like there's this idea that maybe the coronavirus 19 will change things for the better. But I'm actually really worried the opposite will happen. And instead of a boring dystopia, we will end up on the other side of a horrifying dystopia.
Oh.
Are you following what I'm trying to get at?
Yeah, no. When I'm using boring, I have Camus and the French existentialist firmly in mind, of the absurdness, and that this could be an absolute horror show. But we're going to be the little dog with a coffee cup with fire around us going, this is fine, because we're going to gently be taken into hell. No, because it's everything. We don't know what the other side holds. I put a tweet out the other day that we are in a liminal state between two normals. The normal that existed December, or maybe November 2019, because I think the virus really started showing up in December. Was the very first indications of it. And whenever this is done, whatever this is, and we don't know what this is yet, we're still in the middle of it. We may very well be potentially in the beginning of it. It may be very interesting to watch this series that I'm doing every week. Once this is all done, I'm trying to, this is almost a document in real time itself. Every week sort of changes. My hair gets longer every week. I'll get it cut.
Better get those clippers.
My wife said she'll try to cut it. We'll see how that goes.
Have you ever got it? Have you ever got it really short before?
Oh,
that's the new.
I've done it for field work, and when I do it myself, it'll go all the way down to the base. But the thing is, we're going to have to rethink everything. Like, what is why, the what and the whys of sort of everything we do. What is archaeology at its core? And why are we doing it?
I mean,
what is heritage at its core, and why do we do it? And I think, and a lot of us in this industry kind of understand those things. These aren't new questions to us, but I think we need to sort of take those things and reframe them to a public. A public has gotten used. I always get that. I always pronounce that weird. To seeing the presentation of heritage in a particular manner. And I think we need to present it differently, because it's going to be a different world. When we discuss archaeology, and we have the entire world of contract archaeology, that may just need to die. Just die.
Yeah.
It's been floundering. It just needs to die and replaced with something else. Because the role that it serves is important. We need day-to-day professional archaeologists as a career outside the academy, because there is enough out here that needs to be done. But when in most the developed world, and even in the global south, when archaeology is directly tied to development, development always wins. So that's been horror. I mean, that's a horror show before this pandemic even started. So maybe we can change that.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, even if we make changes, it's too little, too late. I think the thing is, we have to really radically get out of the mindset of like, oh, if we make a couple of tweaks, then everything will be okay. It really won't. I mean, if we want to present a different side of archaeology to the public, we're going to actually have to fundamentally change the way in which archaeology is created. And that means not having like a hierarchical system of curators. Like a museum does not necessarily have to follow a business structure where you have a CEO at the top, and then you have your managers, and then you have your mid-managers.
No, everything
You can
should
actually probably flatten.
I mean,
You can make
and
it flat.
A lot of places need to be flat, because as we saw, and we even in the business world should be flat, because we saw once your labor is gone, it falls.
I think,
So what are all those
but
middle
the thing is,
managers doing stuff?
people, yeah, and the thing is, the problem is as you said, we're still going to be dealing with a form of capitalism after the coronavirus ends. I mean, unless we get really lucky. And what that will mean is
unfortunately,
that
though,
we
lucky
will
is most
have
likely
to.
going to be violent.
Well, and this is my biggest issue with like a change that is fundamentally changing the economic relations between people, is just like this pandemic going to affect the most vulnerable and the most marginalized, and that's a big problem. I don't know if I can really stomach killing more people who are marginalized for what, but coming back from that, what we could do is we could make a number of changes within the heritage industry that allow people to be paid well, and that allow people to actually work and do what they love. The thing is, nobody's a curator for the money. Nobody works in heritage because they want money. Like, it's such a ridiculous thing. I think it shows with so many precarious and part-time positions and temporary positions, and this whole fight for actually getting a job in the first place in heritage, in archaeology, is because people want to do it. You don't need massive paychecks to get people on board. People are already on board. The fact is that the problem is they're not being paid for that enthusiasm. So I think really what we need to rediscover and re-understand is that there are people in the heritage industry who are, I would say, 100% paid 40 times their market value. And, if we're really going to play the whole capitalism game, you should be paid your market value. You should then go up constantly against other people in the market and keep swapping it in. But no, archaeology and heritage is nepotistic. And I know this because I know people in archaeology and heritage. Like, everybody knows each other, People are going to know me.
It's, after doing this for a decade, I know exactly how this stuff works. You bounce
and that's the
around,
thing. I think that
I think I've only
and that's what needs to change.
I think I've only ever filled out like an application once. Even my first job my first job was because I was at the university. I was working in a lab, and they're like, "Hey, this person has a 1-month assignment. They'll pay you for the month." Okay. By the end of that month, they're like, "Hey, we're going to go out in the field, and this cultural firm is the one going to do it. I'm gonna tell them to hire you as one of their techs on this project." And I'm like, "Cool," and that's how I got into the field. So yeah, it's completely
the thing is, I actually had the opposite experience, where my first archaeology job was somebody took a chance on me. They were a small business owner, and they said, "Look, I sent an open email to them, and they said, yeah, come on board. I've got a job for you to do for a couple of weeks." And I was like, yes. And they actually spoke to me, and they believed in what I could do, and they believed I was willing to learn and everything. So, I want to say there are really good people out there in heritage, and I think we have to be really careful not to, I think the problem with archaeology is it's made up of all these small little companies,
right.
And a couple of very big ones. But what we're needing to change is not just get rid of all these companies, but really fundamentally, structurally change the way in which they operate. That's right. The real takeaway here.
The villains in the industry are the pressures outside of it. I mean, I've done enough where I've managed a few projects and things like that, and typically the low money expectation and the soul crushing timetables are given to you by your clients because they've grown to accept that as a normal. And if you're if by chance you're doing the worst thing of construction monitoring, You are the least. You are the afterthought. You are the government has required us to have you hang around, but we don't care about you. So we you
Hmm.
know, so we might not inform you to be here on time or things like that. So that entire mentality
Hmm.
needs to change. And before we let this all go, let's make sure we're very
Hmm.
clear. Um, the Elgin marbles need to be at the Parthenon Museum in Greece.
Absolutely, 100%. Elgin marbles repatriate, everything else repatriated. I mean, the thing is, like, just as a like kind of like a final thought, there is no complete record of all the human remains in all the museums in all the world.
Right.
Like, there's not. If you ask the museums in the UK, for example, they're slowly digitizing their records to have human remains, like, so they can tell you how many human remains they have. But I know for a fact that they couldn't tell you off the bat. And
Right,
I
and
want to
that's
know why there's so many human remains in museums that we do not know about. Like, is that not? And that's unacceptable,
and
in my opinion.
that is really horrible here in the United States because a lot of
Yeah.
those human remains are
Hmm.
of Native Americans, and
Yeah.
so you get this trouble of trying to repatriate back to the tribes. I know that led to an entire
Hmm.
legislation in the 1990s of
Yeah.
repatriating these things. It's like they're just sitting in the back of museums, like, oh yeah, some anthropologist in the 1870 stumbled upon this mound, dug it up casually, and got these bones, and then
Hmm.
threw it in the Yale collection or the Smithsonian collection or the
Yeah.
University of Pennsylvania collection, and it just sits there
And
forever.
it's not without issue as well. Like, these situations are often complex and multifaceted. It's not because it's going to be fixed by sending everything back.
Right.
But I think the process of repatriation, where the museum is the power that the museum has is taken away from the museum, that's the important thing. I think far too often in repatriation cases at the moment, the museum holds all the cards. And I think we have to start depowering the museums and put the museums on the defensive foot and force them by law to prove why they should keep these things. Because right now, even normal repatriation situations, they are judge and jury. And I think we need to take that
Yeah,
away.
in the United States, we talk about stakeholders, and it's implied that
Hmm.
stakeholders are all sort of on an equal footing, which like most sort of governmental and things like that, it's they're always first among
Hmm.
equals type of situations where which we were
Hmm.
saying earlier about flattening things. These need to be equals, true equals.
Hmm.
Whoever the stakeholders are in that decision making, whoever the dissenting
Hmm.
community of these human remains need to have an equal voice in this. And in the United States, there are there have been examples of good discussions where it's like,
Hmm.
okay, we will allow and donate this to your museum because we feel that it will help educate a broader public about our tribe and our nation. But that is because they came to an agreement as equals, not because
Hmm.
this was we're keeping it. We got to do some more DNA tests on it because those
Hmm.
bioanthropologists love to do DNA samples of native populations. And can you let us do these tests first? And it's like, no, I don't want you to
Hmm.
tear apart. But
Yeah.
this topic is very good. We might have to come back to this at a later episode
Oh,
of
definitely.
how the anthropologist and the archaeologist are not without fault. They are the bad guys in a lot of
Of
cases.
course. Yeah.
And given this pandemic and everything that's going on right now, how can we change? How can anthropology and archaeology and heritage overall, as people and as an institution with their
Hmm.
theories and methodologies, change? But I think we're going to save that for a different time. So I think we're going to wrap
Yeah.
up now. Tristan, do you have any final words?
Hmm. No, I would just say, if any of your neighbors need help, look out for them, check in on your friends, play video games online with them, talk to them, just like check in on people and help them out. This is not going to be over in a week or 2 weeks. This is going to be take a long time. So get comfortable, look after yourself, and yeah, we'll see in a couple months where we are.
Yeah, and as I've sort of mentioned, sort of every week, it's as simple as putting a note under the on the door of sort of some of your maybe elderly neighbors if you're in an apartment or something, just to let them know that you can maybe run out for them if that's something that's possible for you to do, to take care of yourself, especially if you're alone during times like this.
Mm-hmm.
Reach out to people if Twitter has a very active community. This, as much as we have badmouthed social media over the past decade, it might be through social media is the way that we can get through this
Mm-hmm.
in some way, shape, or form. Reach out to friends. Like I said, play online video games. Do Zoom watch parties of like Netflix shows or something. Just stay active. Keep your mind active. And so forth. And if
Mm-hmm.
you need any, have any questions after the show and things like that, you can contact me on Twitter
Mm-hmm.
at Archaeothoughts. You can contact Tristan at An Archaeologist. So
Mm-hmm.
it's AN Archaeologist
Yep.
on
You can
Twitter.
also catch all my stuff. You can also catch all my stuff over at the Archaeology Podcast Network. That's ArcPodNet. I do a show called Modern Myth. Modern Myth. I also am the producer for Archaeoanimals, which is about zoo archaeology.
Which
So
had
if you're
a
interested, I'm always up for a chat.
and we had Alex as a guest a couple weeks ago from the Archaeanimals podcast.
Oh, you
So
did?
shout out to Alex as
Yeah,
well.
she had a Lilo and Stitch
Hoodie
Lilo and
on the
Stitch hoodie on, I
hoodie on the
think, if I
entire time.
remember. Yeah,
Okay. So
there you go.
until next time, I will be here next Wednesday at
Hmm.
noon Eastern time. I think that's 4 Greenwich Mean Time. I don't know. That's all hard.
12 is 5. 12 is 5, so
I don't know.
yeah, it's changed up. We're in British summertime at the moment,
Oh.
so
Look up American time, East Coast, and then you'll be fine. Sorry.
no worries. No
So,
worries.
so yeah.
Thank you.
And one last thing before I sign off. If you wish to be a guest on this show, because as of right now, I don't know who my guest will be next week. Also, reach out to me on Twitter. You can go into my DMs or you can email me. It's archaeothoughts@gmail.com or Twitter at archaeothoughts. So once again, I will see you next Thursday. Take care of each other. Take care of yourself. If we all do that, we will get through this. And until next time, I'll see you.